Hi there. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's really great to have you here today at noon. It's quite late London time, so I really appreciate Eyal for joining us here today in San Francisco. So for everyone who doesn't know, my name is Dina Beard. I'm the director of the lab, and the lab sits on Ramaytush Ohlone land, otherwise known as San Francisco. We extend our gratitude and respect to the many indigenous peoples who are stewarded this land for generations. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the lab, we really consider ourselves an anarchist project in many ways. We are committed to giving artists as much funding, time, and space to do their work. That means we give artists between $25,000 and $100,000 each, usually about 2 to 3 each year, and keys to our space, the login for our website, and the capacity to completely and totally reinvent the institution itself. I can't say that always works, but we definitely try. It's an attempt. So we really want to know how far each artist can take this inquiry and how much we can make the kind of project of art on that level possible. So we are broadcasting to you live from the lab right now through this weird and deeply flawed interface called Zoom. And until we have the chance to be together in a room together, to conspire, to hang out, we have been using these forum conversations as a way to bridge ideas, proposals, ways of thinking, strategies of understanding between artists, poets, activists, people from all walks of life. And we started these at the beginning of the pandemic, of course. But as you know, and hopefully if you've tuned in before, we really need you to participate in the conversation for this to work. We want it to be a collective conversation as much as we'd have in this type of space. So if you can use the Q&A button, I think it's at the bottom of your screen, to type in any questions during the talk or afterwards. We'd like to keep that going as much as possible. Just try to keep your questions kind of short and concise so that they're easy for me to read back out loud after the talk. So I really appreciate that. So I invited Eyal Weizman here to speak about his work with forensic architecture, which is a multidisciplinary research group based at Goldsmiths in London. Forensic architecture investigates cases of state violence and human rights violations around the world, and they've done a very, very extraordinary job of this. I highly recommend reading the bio on our event page for Eyal or going to their website to see more, but I'm not going to go too into that today. I'm sure Eyal will give us more of an overview. So our forums thus far have kind of circled around the idea of art as dismantling systems of perception, a process of kind of reconfiguring the way that we sense the world in a way that is not managed by the state or designed by corporations. We've been thinking a lot about the role of art institutions in this process and as a space where value is negotiated, sometimes problematically. So we really want to think about how art can reclaim its powerful role as a site for helping us tune into the evidentiary reality of the world that we live in. And I think Eyal will help us kind of understand where his work fits in with that process. So you'll have a lot more to say on these matters. So I appreciate your joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you, Eyal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. I'll stop sharing now. Come back. And here's Dana.
Thank you so much, Eyal. That was absolutely marvelous. And, you know, hopefully the way that this shifts perception in such a clear way, you know, and allows us to think about how we move through the world and see images in news media and various other media is so exceedingly important. It gives us agency. So we have 3 questions here so far, and please, we'll probably try to keep it short today. So just make sure to, if you're submitting a question, make it quick so we can get to it and process it. Thank you. So Matt Davis asks, how does the ability to get access to the necessary source data impact this work? I am guessing that the mistake of releasing the thermal video, I guess that was in the first case, will not be repeated again if it helped discredit the official story.
Every case that we deal with is starting from a certain lack, from a certain inability. There is a differential in vision between forensics and counter-forensics. Whereas forensics is predicated on a simple assumption that the state could see more. The state has more data, can see more, can know more than the individuals it interrogate. Counter-forensics always has, we see less than the state. But we need to mobilize what we have and gear it up in a way that makes it more effective. And here's where aesthetics become also important. And so, you know, each case has a different kind of problem in it. Videos are not released by the state. The videos that are released are fake or distorted intentionally, or, you know, other things are fabricated. We're always operating is something that I called in my last book, under the threshold of detectability. And sometimes the inability to see what the state sees is itself the trace of the crime.
That's great. So D. Laura asks, have you developed projects of forensic art in Central America, specifically in Honduras, where there are so many human rights violations and killings, specifically, you know, Berta Caceres? So basically that's a specific question. Have you thought about Honduras or looked at Honduras?
No, I mean, we worked in different places in Central and South America, in Mexico and Guatemala. We work now in Colombia. We haven't worked in Honduras, would be interested, but we don't, our interest is not regional. Our interest is topical, is conceptual, is mediatic. We enter and we take cases. We understand that we are not like a big human rights organization that can, you know, like have a Honduras office and a Palestine office and a US office, etc. We need to choose cases that allow us to develop new ideas, new concepts, new ways to evade the state gaze and subvert it and invert it in a different way. So the choice of having a case is not always like what is the most pressing and horrible treatment of state actors, but where we can make the most difference. So, but this is not to say that, you know, that Honduras is not a place where we could work. Very often, if people are motivated, we would support them. There's another way in which we engage. You know, for example, if the person that asked that question would like to undertake work like that, and has the, you know, the basic skills to start that, we would support them with opinion, with peer review, with advice, etc.
That's great. So an anonymous attendee asks, have you found that there is more attention on your work as true crime media grows in popularity? How do you feel about this?
No, maybe that's why there's quite a, you know, healthy interest in our work now, from the media and from the art world, although that is thankfully a bit waning now. You know, in the art world, there's like, you know, everybody's interested in you and then they move on, and so it's okay, it's quiet. It's not that we don't do, we work on some exhibitions and we use some art world funding to do this or that. Whether it is because of true crime, I hate true crime. I mean, this is really the work, the opposite work of us. I mean, we are not forensic specialists. Counter-forensics is a very different kind of practice with very different assumptions and very different tools, techniques, you know. So I'm actually not even seeing that. I'm not watching that, but it might be that, you know, people kind of like forensics now. So this is why we get a little bit of attention.
So an anonymous attendee asks, do you have concerns that the proliferation of your technologies like AI that you rely on so much can ultimately undermine trust in reality and bolster arguments of your work as fake?
I think it's a very good question. I think that there is nothing guaranteed. There's no success guaranteed, and there's so many risks. You know, sometimes, I mean, the most basic risk is like, sometimes even taking a case could be a mistake because the state is going to use it against the vulnerable. sometimes entering into court, validate a court system and the legal system that needs not validation. Sometimes, like showing material, silence things that needs to be heard. And you need to be aware of it. And you need to try to balance that. There are no simple answers. And personally, as a intellectual, I feel that the closer you are to a dangerous thing, the more agency you may have. The road to kind of political agency, to open things up, enter through danger, not through taking a safe, and not only just personal danger. Some of us are sometimes, but it's not, nothing's compared to the communities we work with. But those kind of conceptual pitfalls, silencing, erasing, representing things wrongly, contributing, negatively to a particular case. This is why autocritique is very important for us. So we don't critique. We are not like a critical practice in a way that we critique the state, or critique this, or critique the city, or critique the police. We confront them. We don't critique them. We use our critique for ourselves. So we would say, if we learned anything in our long kind of path through critical studies, is that this kind of like deconstructing one's own position, understanding your actions, your position within a situation, is really important for you also to grow and to become better in what you do.
So well said. Yeah. So Violet Spurlock sends her thanks and has a question. Can you describe the experience of translating evidence into aesthetic material and the stakes of those creative decisions? For instance, what was the thinking behind the choice of music in the Warren Kanders video?
Yeah. Okay. So there's different things here. Again, aesthetic choices. I started by saying that what we think aesthetics is like. Aesthetics is to see the lights in the car, to find that the lights are on amongst hundreds of little clips. You aestheticize yourself. You make yourself sensitive to and you are able to both intellectually, because we see through our intellect, train yourself to become more sensitive. And by the way, training oneself to become more sensitive is also exposing yourself to pain. And I say it a lot to my team, which is sometimes suffering from secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, it's called. If you don't care, if you don't feel the pain, you'll also not be a good investigator. You cannot be removed from that. So to aestheticize yourself is also to open yourself to feeling, to seeing, to sensing, and to feeling pain. And that's really important. So that is, and then there are, of course, all the tricks of representation, that you can do good or crap, or, in different times, both. As you need to capture people's attention so that they listen to what you have to say and what you found, as you can seduce your audience. There's something that really, kind of the magic of now forensics in general, forget about counterforensics, the work sometimes of lawyers claiming and showing evidence. If you would tell them that their practice is a static practice, they'll throw you down all the stairs. They hate to hear that. But there is no forensic investigator and there is no lawyer that does not understand how important theatrics, rhetorics, the kind of the force of presentation in image, in sound, in voice, in moving image, is important to make their point. We are in a kind of domain of argumentation, and aesthetics is obviously part of it. That does not mean that what we say is untrue. What it means, the true is just the beginning. What we need is to convince you. Now, sometimes we use like technology that is in itself, we understand is um, developed to generate human rights, where satellite images are military technology. The internet has its origin. AI, this is like the biggest kind of like big brother now type thing. We try to, in this situation, to both use technology and critique technology at the same time. So here's, okay, another moment of critique. Now, so like we would say, we would look at satellite images, we'd see what we can see in them, we'd show what we can see. And then we would show that we think that the pixelation here is actually hiding a crime. I would look into the actual component parts of that technology. Or in AI, as we've done in exhibition in where are you? You're in San Francisco, right? So the Young is in San Francisco? Yeah, in a piece in the Young, we call it introspecting the algorithm, how we use AI to we use it in both fields. One, in the field of the real world where violations are taking place. We use it to find images very fast so that our researchers could interrogate them. But we use the way in which we use it, if you like, in order to shine a very thin light, very faint light sometimes, but light all the same, on this opaque black box algorithm and understand it better and publish what we know. So that's what we did in the Young. I don't know if it's still on there. I didn't speak about the music in that film, but it's it's part of the general point that I was making.
Like that point about theater. So Eric Teese asks, could you speak about the relationship of forensic architecture to goldsmiths? Is there what freedom or constraints academia puts on your work?
Academia pays my salary. I'm a professor there. They give us a space, beautiful, like the space behind Dana, like this kind of like, this is looking like our office. Just with like, it feels like you walk inside, it feels like a combination of newsroom and art studio, whatever that means. And we are in it, but we operate independently from them. But it's a healthy relation, and Goldsmiths is a fantastic, dysfunctional, robust, creative mess of a school, which is really always good kind of environment to be in when you want to do different stuff that don't have a home.
Let's see, maybe trying to decide, there's a bunch of questions, so maybe just one or two more. Yomna Osman asks, is there a particular critique that you have received of your work that you keep going back to?
Yeah, I think that although these are things I write about for the past, I think, 12 years, I haven't been very successful in changing people's mind about, there's in kind of like breaking the intellectual habit of seeing like, oh, science and technology, positivists, non-humanistic, and by as if, and with that critique all often comes, you value the truth, you have authority to speak the truth, etc. So probably there's something there, if I've, after all these years of writing very, very carefully about the need to entangle testimony and evidence, and all the work we do with witnesses. So I don't believe in this division of, evidence, piece of matter on the one hand, testimony, a human voice, the fragile human voice, or the other. I think evidence is also fragile. I think evidence also speaks in a traumatized way. I think the distinction of humans and matter is not as, is not as harsh and strong as we think it is. And I also think that a lot of the evidence that we interrogate, consider a video from a conflict zone. I haven't seen a video of a traumatic thing that happened that does not have the voice of the person filming. People cry, people pray, people say, people curse. It's both testimony and evidence at the same time. And you need to be tuned both to your humanistic side and to your scientific one at the same moment. You need to merge them. Very often we develop techniques of interviewing witnesses through synthetic artificial environment. Again, mixing in a strange way testimony and evidence, not keeping them as two completely separate realities and worlds. I think that, the idea of opening up speech to non-human entities, to surfaces, to photographs, to trees, to environments, to rivers, it's in opening up the conversation. I don't think that one mode of enunciation need to drown the other. I've been, throughout my adult life, trying to claim for it, and I admit not always successfully, because when you do come to work closely with people that suffer violence, the suspicion from forms of techniques and technologies is so high that people associate them very much with what repressed them. And it's harder sometimes to convince communities in pain that, although on the other hand, we only always work, we never enter a space of trauma uninvited. We never say, okay, we'd like to work on this killing of this person. We only work invited by the family. So it's not really the family, it's not really the people that would commission us would want to work with us because of what we could do. It would be like the second or third circle around that kind of would, still have this suspicion. And we operate within that field. And I think it's one of those, kind of moments that are interesting for me as an intellectual, of kind of like not operating within clarity. It's always a field in which everything can turn around, in which you always need to navigate, you always need to negotiate, always need to discuss, you always need to exchange, you always need to collaborate in order for things to work. There is nothing that can be taken simply for granted, and keeping fresh and keeping the desire to engage and to explain and to discuss it again and more as long as necessary is important. And this is why I see it as an opportunity to talk about those things rather than, but so them not being taken for granted is actually quite good, keeps us on our toes.
That's such a beautiful note to end on, I think. And I know there's a ton of questions and a lot of them are fantastic. And I'm sorry we can't get to them all, but it's very late in London. So we really appreciate your time, Eyal, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.